Katie, happy Passover.
Jesse, I'm not Jewish.
Aren't you, though?
You know, a lot of people think that I'm Jewish based on my last name. However, I'm not Jewish.
Can I briefly make the case to you as to why I view you as Jewish culturally, if not religiously?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to list off a series of characteristics. You can say yes or no as to whether they apply to you.
Sounds good.
Neurotic.
Absolutely.
Okay. Intelligent.
Debatable.
In the arts.
More or less, yes.
People hate you due to prejudice and misunderstanding.
Definitely true.
Mazel tov, welcome.
You know, I've always wanted to be a member of a tribe. I think this counts, doesn't it? Although I will say, I have a friend who is considers herself Native American. I'm not sure if she's actually Native American, and she recently told me that she asked me to stop using the word tribal. So I'm not sure we can use that term anymore. A
white lady, it sounds like, who calls herself Native American, told you not to use tribal.
It was actually Elizabeth Warren.
Katie, what podcast are people listening to?
This is Blocked and Reported, the one and only podcast about the internet, and I'm Katie Herzog.
And I'm Jesse Single, and I'm an actual Jewish person.
Happy Passover. Can you explain to me what Passover actually is?
Yeah, basically, back in the day, there was this pharaoh in Egypt who was a dick, and he made us build pyramids and stuff for him. We were slaves. Then Moses came along. I'm going to see how much of this I can remember by heart. Moses came along, and he was like, Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh was like, dude, no way. They went back and forth. And then eventually God unleashed 10 plagues, including killing the Egyptians' firstborn males, which is intense.
Yes.
And under the cover of all those plagues, the Jews fled and God parted the Red Sea for them. And here we are today making podcasts.
Wow, that was very kind of God to do that for your people. Our people, I guess, technically, now.
Exactly. Our people. Welcome to the tribe.
So does this mean that all Jews originated from Northern Africa?
I mean, if, as I do, you think that anything written in an ancient text is literally true, then yes.
Literally. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you're a person of color.
I'm a POS, a person of Semitism.
That's exactly what POS stands for.
Yeah, when people call me a POS, which they do quite frequently, I assume that's what they're referring to.
Absolutely. All right, Jesse, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to talk about problematic men.
So you're the right person to talk to about that.
Yeah, exactly. There have been two sort of, I guess, resuscitations of long-running controversies lately involving the comedian Louis C.K. and the podcaster Joe Rogan. And then maybe at the end, we're going to throw in some Bill Maher as well, too, right?
Yeah, we might as well if we're talking about problematic men.
Okay, so I guess, what we should try to do with both of these is at the top of each segment, we should, maybe lay out as clearly as possible the facts of the matter, because I feel like, and I bet you agree with me on this, that a vast amount of the conversation about these subjects is not really done from a place of mutual agreement about exactly what happened and what we don't know, right?
The truth is very relative when it comes to these people.
Yeah. So which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with Rogan.
Okay, so Joe Rogan is one of the most popular podcasters on the planet. He has a very weird, popular podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience, where, tell me if you agree with this assessment, he basically just has all sorts of guests on, ranging from Elon Musk to Eddie Izzard to everyone. And they just talk sometimes for 2.5 hours, right? Yeah,
it's super long. He does have both liberals and conservatives, I would say. He has a sort of across the spectrum, lots of libertarians in there as well. Definitely less echo chambery, I think, than many of the podcasts out there.
Yeah, and I think his podcast has hit this, there's sort of maybe a bit of a gap in the middle. As a lot of media has gotten more predictably ideological, there are fewer and fewer, brave truth tellers like you and I. And I think Joe Rogan really appeals to sort of, in much the same way maybe Sam Harris does or Dave Rubin does, even though I'm not a Rubin guy at all. They appeal to a big group of people who maybe don't feel like they're that ideological, who view themselves as just wanting to figure out the world. That's not to mean they're actually free of ideology, and we can get into that. But I think that's sort of the appeal of someone like Joe Rogan, right? He's not a hack coming at things from one perspective or another. He's trying to sort of, from his point of view, figure things out as he goes.
Yeah, I think that would technically make him a centrist. According to the definition of a centrist, that is somebody who looks at an issue and chooses their positions based on the issue, and not the commonly held definition of centrist, which is basically a moderate.
Yes. Well, and the other more recent definition of centrist is like a Nazi, but much worse.
But much worse.
Okay, so I was shocked to see that this had actually only kicked off in January. This was like that weird coronavirus time stretching thing. I thought this was, last fall. In January, and we'll include a clip here, Rogan, basically said he was thinking of voting for Bernie Sanders, that he liked Bernie Sanders, something of a Sanders guy.
Who are you going to vote for in the primary?
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. Him as a human being, when I was hanging out with him, and I believe in him. I like him. I like him a lot. What Bernie stands for is a guy who, well, look, you could dig up dirt on every single human being that's ever existed if you catch them in their worst moment, and you magnify those moments, and you cut out everything else, and you only display those worst moments. That said, you can't find very many with Bernie. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life. And that, in and of itself, is a very powerful structure to operate from.
Bernie Sanders' campaign put that little clip and quote up on Twitter. And then, Katie, refresh my memory, everyone was cool with it. There was no controversy at all, right?
It was a fucking dumpster fire. And this was a pre-COVID dumpster fire. So it was like, when the dumpster fire would sort of briefly take over the news cycle and nobody was focusing on the end of the world. So Warren supporters in particular use this as an opportunity to sort of pose the guilt by association argument, where Bernie Sanders' elevation of this sort of lukewarm Joe Rogan endorsement made Bernie Sanders complicit in Joe Rogan's previous crimes, which are, there's so many of them, I don't know where to begin. I mean, first of all, he watches fucking MMA or comments on MMA, so there's that. Toxic masculinity right there. And so Rogan, has a history of making impolite, politically incorrect statements about an array of groups of people. And the fact that the Bernie campaign chose to elevate this was, according to Warren supporters, indicative of his own crimes.
Right. And so this is where it gets tricky, because you're talking about a guy who has generated a huge amount of interviews in recent years, and there's hundreds of hours. And it is true that if you look at some of them, they could come across as offensive. Like someone dug up an old clip of him making a racist joke about seeing Planet of the Apes, about the neighborhood being like Planet of the Apes. There was also controversy over Fallon Fox, who is a transgender woman who fights cisgender women in mixed martial arts or ultimate fighting, I forget which. This was naturally a controversial subject because, she is someone who went through a male puberty and in certain ways has the shape and strength of a male body. It gets very complicated when you go on hormones, but a lot of the comments Rogan made about trans women, which were then stripped of context, were about this very specific question of what the criteria should be, for when a trans woman would fight other women in UFC or mixed martial arts, which of all of the big, broad, important cause that is trans right, this is like an outlier of an outlier case, right?
Right. And I think it's also worth mentioning what you mentioned, that he, said basically a racist joke about going to watch, was it Black Panther or Planet
of the Apes? Yep.
Okay, so he was going to watch Planet of the Apes in this black theater, or a theater in a black neighborhood, and then basically said, I felt like I was in Planet of the Apes. And then he immediately said after that was racist. And he does sort of turn it around a little bit to have a moment of sort of brief awakening. So I think it's also worth mentioning that he was aware that what he was saying was totally inappropriate. And then he also sort of, shifted the blame onto himself in that particular case. Not that it makes the joke any less offensive.
Yeah. And, I think, as always, we'll include resources in the show notes, but there, it's hard on a podcast to go through every instance of offensive thing someone said. People should definitely enter this conversation informed about what he said. But that was one part of the controversy. The second part of the controversy was recently, a week or two ago, he said, in effect, that now that Biden is the presumptive nominee, he could see himself voting for Trump. And among the people who criticized him the last time around, when he offered his lukewarm endorsement of Sanders, this is sort of proof that he was evil all along, that he's never the sort of person whose endorsement Sanders should have touted, and so forth. It just proves what they were already claiming about who Rogan was as a person. And to me, this very much misses the point, because I think you and I were in the same camp where we're both like, oh, it's cool that someone as far to the left as Sanders could appeal to someone like Rogan, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and the people who listen to Rogan's show, and I'm sort of stereotyping here, are maybe the sort of people that Sanders would want to attract. I think it tends to be a little bit of a less highbrow, less working class, more working class audience, who in theory are the people who, Sanders was trying to woo to his campaign.
Right. And so to me, I think all we were ever saying, none of us was ever saying like Joe Rogan is the model of the perfect progressive on every issue, but we were more saying his huge listenership reflects the fact that many, many Americans are open to progressive arguments, but are not perfectly woke, and they're not perfectly educated about the right language. They might disagree on some stuff like, trans women in ultimate fighting. So I think the sort of purity spiral and the purity contest where, remember, no one's even accusing Bernie Sanders of himself of having said anything offensive here. It's that he touted the endorsement of someone who had in the past made offensive remarks. It's this guilt by association thing that I think in both of our travels in sort of lefty politics and writing, this is maybe a bigger and a bigger problem with these various movements, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you see this, I think, mostly in the media. I'm not sure that the actual voting populace cares about this shit as much as, people like us, people who write on the internet for a living. And also, to me, it's interesting because I will say I was disappointed in Joe saying that he might vote for Donald Trump, because I don't see under any circumstances where it's a moral position to vote for Donald Trump. I think that not voting is slightly more moral, but I still think no matter who the candidate is here, we have two choices. One is Donald Trump, the other is Joe Biden. And if you care about things like the working class or immigrants or climate change or the government response to the coronavirus, there's one moral position here, and that's to vote for Joe Biden, even if he is not by any means a perfect candidate. But it also shows that Joe and a lot of people in this country don't vote necessarily on policy. They vote on personality. Like Joe said, he cares about Bernie's consistency. I don't particularly find, beating the same drum for 30 years, that level of consistency to be a beneficial position in politics at this moment. But people don't vote rationally. It's oftentimes based on personality. And I think that, it's important for Democrats, it's important for the media to realize this, it's important for political strategists to realize this, that there's oftentimes this is a totally irrational choice.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. It's less whether or not you agree with him about the merits of Sanders having been consistent for so long. It's there's a terrible and worsening failure of a lot of political elites to understand the way voters sort stuff through. And Rogan is this sort of exemplar of the everyman figure who, frankly, is not particularly informed on the policies at stake. I know that sounds elitist to say, but I think the fact that he's like Sanders and then he chooses Trump over Biden shows you that he's not thinking this stuff through ideologically. And there's this failure to understand that, like, voters, it really is just sort of the feel they get from candidate. What frustrated me about this, and this is not an original point, is that any successful Democratic nominee for president is going to have to appeal to millions of voters who are maybe a little bit more socially conservative than elite pundits and politicians, or maybe don't talk about the world in exactly the same way. And in fact, that's what's happening, because Joe Biden won huge numbers of black voters in South Carolina. And I promise you, these voters do not look at these issues in exactly the same way that, like, DC human rights groups do. I'm picking that example because they very forcefully denounced Rogan. And it's just interesting how it's worked out, because it's always been the case that there was never going to be a successful Democratic nominee who did not appeal to a lot of somewhat more socially conservative, less woke voters. That happened. It just wasn't the candidate I think a lot of us thought it was going to be coming out of Nevada.
Yeah, certainly. It was a bit of a shock. Although, I haven't seen a single take that was like, blame black voters for Joe Biden. I actually kind of want to see that take, because, when Trump won, we talked about this last week, there was this narrative that, white women were to blame for this. Well, if you're pissed about Joe Biden, you might want to blame black voters in South Carolina.
Right. It's so ridiculously disingenuous. Like, all these a big swath of like Elizabeth Warren fans make these very essentialist, oversimplified things with like the clap emojis, like listen to black women. It's like, well, okay, we've listened to them, and they want someone you don't want to be president. So
not those black women.
Right, exactly. I mean, now we're getting into other territory, but the point is, I just think there's still this massive disconnect between people like us and the vast majority of the Democratic electorate.
Did you see the other bad news Joe Biden got today?
No, what happened?
The DSA officially announced they are not going to be endorsing Joe Biden.
That's absolutely shocking.
A point of personal privilege.
Democratic Socialists of America. We could, at some point, we could do like a 5-part series just on like the drama in various regional DSAs. It is the most incredible fodder for just human pathology and stupidity. And I say that about a group whose goals I largely agree with, but it's just a whole other planet.
Oh, yeah. So Seattle has a city council member who, I don't know if she's technically in the DSA. She's a socialist. She has her own party. And her name's Shama Sawant. She's done some things that are good. Like she was very instrumental in fighting for $15 minimum wage here. But mostly she hasn't been able to accomplish anything. Like her big thing is pushing for rent control, which is unconstitutional in the state of Washington. Last year, the city council, under sort of helmed by Sawant, was trying to push through a head tax, so a per employee tax on Amazon. So there's this amazing clip online of Shama Sawant talking about, the workers, how this will help the workers. And then right behind her, you see dozens of construction workers, actual working class people shouting, "No Amazon head tax." It's just so perfect. It's like, those aren't the workers that she's actually speaking for. She's speaking for kind of Amazon tech workers who are, sort of hyper educated and, the people who do things like join the DSA.
Yeah. Something similar happened in New York with AOC and the whole thing about building an Amazon headquarters there, where like a lot of the sort of actual working class working people wanted the job opportunities that would create, in terms of actually building the new plan and maintaining it and stuff. And I think some of the unions even came out for it. And then AOC was against it, which again, doesn't determine who's right. You can't determine who's right based solely on their identity, but it just shows you this stuff is complicated. And even labels like the working class can be appropriated and misused, and people can be dishonest about it.
People dishonest in this climate?
I know, it's shocking. Okay, so yeah, we'll move on to Louis C.K. in a sec. But the last point I want to make about this was this is a general point, not about the present state of the controversy, but when it comes to the Joe Rogan thing, there was this level of intense disingenuousness and myopia in the way it was covered. So I'm going to pick on one guy who I know I can take it. Zach Beauchamp. He's a journalist at Vox. I respect him. I've enjoyed a lot of his stuff, but there's a sense in which so much context is left out. So even on the question of Joe Rogan and gender, Joe Rogan had on Eddie Izzard, who is a legendary comedian who identifies as transsexual. He uses he, him pronouns, but they had like a really wonderful, warm, I think 2-hour chat. That's one example of the idea that Joe Rogan is a hardened transphobe getting a little bit complicated by reality. He also had an interview that I remember, I was in my car listening to the interview. I almost drove it off the road just to make the pain stop. He had on a guy named Adam Conover. Adam Conover has a show named Adam Ruins Everything. It's sort of a myth-busting show. For all I know, it's wonderful. They were talking about youth gender dysphoria. Neither of them, neither Joe nor Adam, had any fucking clue what they were talking about. Every basic thing they could get wrong, they did get wrong. Joe Rogan is out here talking about like 5-year-olds getting surgery, which doesn't happen. Adam is getting stuff wrong on his own. But Adam is sort of exemplifying the very woke positions about youth gender dysphoria, which we can get into somewhere else. The point is, Rogan platforms people sometimes who make very orthodox progressive views. So to look back on his career and just sort of declare him an enemy of LGBT people, or to pretend that this very one specific problem he had related to physical combat between two people could be extrapolated to his feelings about trans people writ large. I see so much of this in journalism these days, and it drives me crazy because people just don't look at these controversies in their full context, which I guess is a good way to bring us to the second problematic man we want to talk about, who is Louis C.K. And why don't you run that down for us, Katie?
Okay, but one thing I want to say before we get to that.
Yes.
If Joe wants to rehabilitate his reputation among the trans community, I think I have a solution for him. He should have us on his podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. If two people who have not generated any controversy in that area, who are trusted, despite not being members of the community, as devout allies of it. Joe, if you're listening, which I know you are, we would be happy to come on whenever.
As a favor.
I know some of your episodes only get 3 or 4 million downloads, which has to be hard. So we want to help.
Okay, so Louis C.K. What is Louis C.K. up to these days, Jesse? I hear he has a special out.
Yep, and you're being too coy because we must admit at this juncture we have both watched his new special, haven't we?
We fucking paid him $8 each to watch his new special.
Actually, someone else downloaded it, and then I got their key. So you are more complicit than I am.
Oh God! Well, my girlfriend paid for it, so or my wife. My wife paid for it. I keep forgetting that we're married, so we can blame her for this. I will say, I did after I watched the special. I was a little bit like, damn, $8? That really that's like an entire month's worth of Hulu
for one piece of content. So in 2017, there was an article in the Times that a bunch of women said that Louis C.K. in his time in show business would ask them if he could masturbate in front of them. And it does not appear they said no explicitly. The closest you get to a no in this article, which we will include in the show notes, is I think one pair of women said they laughed him off, and it's unclear exactly what that entails. It seems pretty clear he didn't get explicit no's. It also seems pretty clear these were awkward situations. He had power over them, and repeatedly he would masturbate in front of these women. He also did it on the phone once or twice, and it was just this open secret within comedy for years.
So he did have power over them. He wasn't the employer of these people, but he had sort of cultural power in the sense that he was more successful than they were.
Yeah.
And he certainly has made women's and men, I assume, he has made people's careers. Tig Notaro, I think, didn't she get she get famous because he pushed her comedy special?
Yeah, although she then sort of disavowed him after this came out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's tricky. This wasn't like people where he was their direct boss. It was just like younger comedians, and this all occurred during periods when he already had some power and juice in the industry. So
and even if he, it's fucked up when you have power over somebody. It's fucked up when you don't have power over somebody. It's fucked up to put somebody in a position where they have to say yes or no to you taking out your penis and jerking off. It's just such a violation of our, cultural norms that it's fucking weird.
Yeah. And yet we watched his special. I thought it was very funny. What did you think?
I thought it was okay. I will say I'm not a huge Louis C.K. fan, but I'm also not a big comedy fan. So I have diagnosed PTSD from working at a comedy club for 3 months when I was 18. And I had to see the same acts over and over 3 times a night. So it's been hard for me to enjoy comedy since then. And don't worry, I'm in therapy over it. So I came at it having never, I think, actually watched a Louis C.K. special all the way through. And I never watched his show either. But I thought there were moments when it was funny. I also thought that it could have been better. He does go into the controversy, and he seems semi-apologetic, but sort of the conclusion that he comes to when he's talking about it is if you're going to do something creepy, get an enthusiastic yes first. I think that as a rule, it's just a bad idea to pull your dick out and masturbate in front of people.
Yeah, I guess that's what it comes down to, because there's a kernel of an important point in what he's saying, which is that there are a lot of situations, I think, in which women are socialized to feel weird about just saying no. And there's actually some research on the best anti-rape interventions in college campus settings have to do with empowering women to say no, when they get into situations that feel a bit suspect or creepy. And what people usually say in response to that is something I agree with, which is it would be much better if we could just have men not be such fucking creeps all the time. I agree with that. But the fact is, in the world we live in, men do this thing, and women often don't feel empowered to speak up. So I think there was that kernel of genuine truth and insight in what Louis was saying. But on the other hand, why do you have to ask people you're not already in a relationship with or close with if they want to see you masturbate? Why do you have to put them in that position? It just strikes me as very different from I think there's this extreme reaction as part of the Me Too movement that's really you're harassing someone if you ask them out or chat them up on a train. I don't think either of us agree with that, but this is just such a different category, right?
Right. I think it's absolutely true that it is difficult under some situations for some women to say no to men. It's also difficult in some situations for women to say no to each other. And, maybe that just shows more like how women are socialized to be polite. But there is this sort of like, sometimes you might engage in some sexual behavior, some other behavior because you just want to get it over with, but if you're not saying no, if you're not saying I'm uncomfortable, people aren't mind readers. So it is sort of, as shitty as it is sort of on the impetus, is sort of on the person who doesn't want to do the thing to actually just vocalize it.
But this is like, there's, I think a new book about campus hookup culture and assault coming out. And this is also a story you hear in other settings, which is like women, especially young ones, like performing sexual acts just because like they want an encounter to be over and then feeling shitty about it. And that is such a profound failure on the part of everyone and on the part of feminism that it's 2020 and women who are not being physically coerced still feel like I have to do this. I can't just say no. Like it makes me feel so crappy because as a man, you're just never, in my experience, as a straight man, it might be different for gay men. In fact, I imagine it is, but you're never put in that situation. You're never put in the situation where you're like, well, I guess I have to do this because otherwise it will create awkwardness. Like it feels like one of those remaining areas where we really do have this weirdly potent and impermeable sort of power that just isn't fair at all.
I wonder if that's because men are hornier and, the likelihood of a man saying no to any sort of, sex act is probably lower. Actually, maybe we'll get dragged for saying that men are hornier than women. That might be violating a tenet.
I don't want this to become an intellectual dark web, but I really hope you can say out loud that men are probably on average, yes, a bit hornier than women, although, maybe we'll get dragged for it. But I think that's part of it. And there also is like just the physical component of men, to the extent women rightfully feel some sense of threat from other men, it's because men are bigger and stronger. And it means that you're not really operating on an entirely equal playing field, which maybe that is an area where like gay relationships, whether gay men or lesbians, are a little bit different. But I guess the key question here is, first of all, Louis C.K. issued awkward apologies to two of these women before anything broke. He clearly had some sense he had done something wrong. He issued a statement that very foolishly did not contain the terms "I'm sorry" or "I'm apologize," but which was otherwise a pretty clear-headed apology. This was shortly after the Times article came out. So what I don't know what to do with is the belief that after all this, after he was disgraced and lost, safe to say, tens of millions of dollars and a lot of professional opportunities, I don't have it in me to say he should never be able to do comedy again when there's clearly an audience of people who want to see him do comedy. And I'm definitely biased here because I think he's one of the most brilliant comedians of all time. And I think he's the best stand-up comic in the world. And I guess I realize I'm a little bit worried that I'm letting that bias me in the same way, NFL players forever get away with horrible off-field conduct just because they're good at catching or throwing a football. Is this the same thing? Are we letting him off the hook too easy?
I think that public humiliation, having your movie that has been made be canceled and losing tens of millions of dollars, is a pretty good punishment for masturbating in front of somebody. If he had murdered somebody and gone to jail and paid his sentence and wanted to come back and do stand-up comedy, I'd be fine with that. And it's like, what is worse, murder or non-consensual, or actually consensual, because he did ask for permission, even if it's fucked up. Masturbation, it just does seem a little bit incoherent, he didn't, wasn't punished in a court of law yet, but he was certainly punished.
Do you think that the cultural critics and others who claim to have some specific problem with the way he apologized or the way he addressed it, do you think they're being disingenuous and that there's any apology in which he also continued to work that they would accept?
Oh, that's a good question. Has anybody been sort of pacified by the men of Me Too by their apologies yet? I'm not quite so sure about that. Al Franken.
Dan, what about Dan? Do you remember the Dan Harmon thing?
Oh, right. Yeah, can you explain that one?
Yeah, no, it's just so there's actually a woman, Megan Gans, a very talented TV writer. She ran my college Onion knockoff and then went to work at the Onion. she basically said Dan Harmon, who's one of the top names in TV, Rick and Morty, Community. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but yeah, she basically just said he was creepy and sort of kept asking her out. I don't think there were any physical allegations, but he did a very contrite apology, and she subsequently said, I accept his apology, which she was under no obligation to do. But I think that's maybe an outlier case because the victim herself publicly said, I accept his apology.
I mean, maybe that's what has to happen is that the actual victims need to accept the apology. And, Sarah Silverman at one point, she did an interview about Louis C.K. and he apparently had jerked off in front of her a bunch of times. She said he always asked, and sometimes she said yes because she thought it was like fucking funny and weird. I think he also did the same to her sister.
Oh my God.
And her sister, I think, just said it was creepy as shit. Which it is creepy as shit. One thing I wish that the comedy special had gone a little bit more into was why he has this sort of kink, because it does seem like a kink, a very problematic one, and I would love to know the psychology of it.
Well, the way he puts it is the quote is something like "Everyone has a thing, and now everyone knows my thing." I don't think everyone has a thing, but I think a pretty large proportion of the population has some sexual interest that most people would find unusual. And in most cases, it's something that doesn't actually inherently harm anyone, which is like, I wonder if part of the appeal for him was like the danger of getting caught or feeling like it doesn't. I think like the orthodox feminist answer was he felt like he was humiliating someone else or having power over them. But when you think about like that actual scene, if anything, it feels like he's being humiliated, right?
Absolutely. I cannot imagine anything more humiliating than like taking out your dick in front of somebody who's not that interested in you and just like, ugh.
Yeah.
I can't, like, I'm having the mental image in my head right now that he's humiliated.
Yeah. And some people do get off on being humiliated. Yeah. So that could be it. I wish he had in the special, I think he should have talked a little bit more about the power differential thing because that really was the issue here. And it's also the kind of thing where like 10 years ago, I do think men were a lot more oblivious about that and just frankly weren't thinking it through in the way they should. So like his actual evolution, if you could see that he actually, thought a lot more about that, maybe people would feel better. But then again, in the written apology, no one accepted, I guess, because it wasn't a full-blown apology. He talks about that pretty forthrightly. So maybe there's just nothing he could say that would work. And I guess, I'm not a markets or everything guy, but what should we do if the fact is that people will fill big theaters to see him talk? I guess I wish the critics would lay out a plan for what we should do now. One option would be to boycott the theaters where he's appearing. I'm not saying I would endorse this, but this would actually try to stop it from happening. Should we shame people who download it or go to see him? It isn't like he hasn't been punished. I'm just not sure what more we're supposed to do, given that we're not talking about a criminal act.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the gist of cancel culture is the idea that not just that I'm going to boycott something, but that everybody else should be forced to boycott it too. And I hate that. To me, it's like people get to make their own choices. If people want to see Louis C.K., they can see Louis C.K. And it's not up to the morality police to, make sure that you or I or anybody else doesn't pay $8 for a special or go see him live. That's just fucking crazy.
Maybe as a compromise, every member of the audience, when he does a show, gets to masturbate in front of him.
That would make it, that's the one thing that would make it better. It's just a whole room full of people jerking off in front of Louis C.K.
We're just brainstorming. There's no bad ideas here.
Yeah, he can come on our show if he wants and masturbate in front of us. Actually, I don't know if that would be worth it. Just
to provide a cantankerous final note, this probably won't surprise you, but I was also really pissed off with the way journalists wrote about this because they did with Louis C.K. the same thing they did with Dave Chappelle when he became controversial for making jokes that were seen as transphobic, where they sort of rewrote his entire trajectory as a comedian to make it sound like once he became controversial, his comedy changed and suddenly became offensive. So for years, Louis C.K. made jokes about the Holocaust. He called a deer the N-word just because he really hates deer in one bit. He talked about coming upon a dead child and having sex with it. During all this time, he was a progressive darling. Culture critics couldn't say a bad word about him. Then this thing comes out. And now suddenly, if he ever says something offensive, that's treated as a sign that he doesn't get it, or he's like some anti-PC firebrand. It got to the point where there was a Slate article basically claiming he has an entirely new fan base, and this fan base is like morally suspect. I wish culture writers could approach these controversies with a little bit of a more realistic understanding of human nature. Like, I'm not at all surprised that a lot of people who love a brilliant comedian are willing to forgive him simply because they just want to see him do more comedy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess it's possible that these writers had never watched his, comedy in the first place. I mean, I knew that, and I've never watched his comedy before this, and I still knew that his whole thing was sort of being offensive. And I had kind of an interesting moment watching this one, because there's a section of the act where he like goes into like a retard, sort of bit,
yeah.
And like I have sort of a knee-jerk, like, bristling, so, like, specifically humor that makes fun of people with Down syndrome. And he wasn't making fun of people with Down syndrome. Really, he was sort of making fun around people with Down syndrome. And so I sort of, I kind of felt myself bristle at that. And then, like, 3 minutes later, he's making jokes about the Holocaust and dead babies, and that didn't bother me at all.
Right.
And I realized, like this is really, it's me. It's my issue. It's like, if I'm not offended by him making jokes about Auschwitz and dead babies, why am I offended with him making, using the word retard? Or he didn't even actually use the word retard. I think he just said retarded like a million times. But it's not, this is just my personal issue. It has got nothing to do with the morality of making jokes about any particular group of people.
I felt so guilty because I'm from Boston. That whole segment is about like Bostonians in the 70s be like, you're retarded. And I could not stop laughing at it. But your point is exactly right. And I just wish the writers writing these terrible think pieces would exhibit a little bit more introspection or intellectual honesty, because, as you say, why did it not bother you when Louis C.K. was making fun of the Holocaust?
Because I'm anti-Semitic, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which is weird for a Jew.
Right. But it's like or with Dave Chappelle, like he made fun of crackheads for years, which not only is like a vulnerable group, but a racially coded group. He had a character that was just like a goofy slapstick crackhead. This never bothered anybody until he makes a joke about, trans people, and suddenly people look at him through a whole new lens. I just, it doesn't work. Like you need to either say it's okay to make jokes about fucked up shit, or it isn't. If you try to pick and choose which jokes aren't and aren't okay, like, you're just never going to have a coherent standard. And it's not sort of fair to comedians. I guess that's weird to say because we're talking about two very successful ones. Humor is weird. People make offensive jokes. I don't think there's a direct connection between making fun, as Louis did, about the way we're okay using some terms to describe developmentally disabled people, but not others, and how prickly we are over these subtle linguistic issues, and actually treating those people badly. I think most people can separate that out.
I hope so, but, well, it's 2020. Who knows?
I'm worried 2020 is somehow going to extend to like 2024, to be honest, at this point.
Yeah, into Trump's third term.
Yeah. You wanted to talk about our close personal friend, Bill Maher.
Yeah, our close personal friend. Okay, so Bill Maher, did you catch his show on Friday?
I did not.
Listen to this.
And finally, new rule: you can't yell at someone for breaking a rule you just made up. Scientists, yes, scientists who are generally pretty liberal, have been naming diseases after the places they came from for a very long time. Zika is from the Zika forest, Ebola from the Ebola River, hantavirus, the Hantan River. There's the West Nile virus and guinea worm and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and of course, the Spanish flu. MERS stands for Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. It's plastered all over airports and no one blogs about it. So why should China get a pass?
Okay, so obviously what Bill is referencing here is the maybe what we could call like the first battle in the new culture wars, the post-coronavirus culture wars. We talked either last week or maybe the week before about whether or not the culture wars are going to continue to exist in a post-coronavirus world. And I think that the reaction to this segment shows that they are, because people immediately, especially people in the media, immediately made this story about Bill Maher's racism. So here's a headline from the Daily Beast. Bill Maher goes on despicably racist rant against China over coronavirus. And this was one in a long line of articles that sort of had the same point, was that, referring to COVID-19 as the Chinese coronavirus or whatever is inherently racist. And so I find the reaction to this interesting, because I think it is an example of Trump derangement syndrome, which is sort of a term that I don't like, but I also think exists, because Trump started calling this, the Wuhan virus or the Chinese coronavirus or the Chinese virus or whatever. And because Trump did it, that makes it seem racist to everybody who hates Trump. And I do think Trump uses this term to trigger people, to trigger the libs, to trigger the media, and it's totally fucking effective. So you have someone like Bill Maher, who is not a Trump supporter, basically saying, like, this is totally inconsistent. We have always called viruses by the origin of the place where they're from, but right now people have decided that this is racist.
I don't think it's inherently racist to name a virus after the place it's from. It also seems like pretty early on, coronavirus caught on as the version everyone used. And I guess to me, if it's Trump going out of his way to use that term and the fact that there's been some like attacks and harassment of Asian people with it, it's just not a hill I would die on. But it's just like, I'm looking at what Bill Maher actually said, and it's pretty clear that his argument, whatever you say of Trump's, Bill Maher's argument isn't motivated by racism. I mean, maybe he's going too far in like the anti-PC direction, but he's basically saying, in the past, we've named diseases after the places they're from. It's not inherently racist to do so. And then, of course, he gets called racist for saying it's not racist to do so. And it just seems like one of those delightfully pre-coronavirus outrage spirals where a few days in, it's hard to remember exactly what people are arguing about. And I definitely agree that this thing where Trump does something he knows is going to freak liberals out, and then they respond to it exactly the way he knows they will and wants them to, I think it doesn't help. I guess it just comes down to, like, to what extent do you think the sort of person who would attack or harass an innocent Asian person over this would be influenced by Trump's use of one term versus another? And that's where I'm just sort of skeptical, because I think that sort of person is so terrible that, they'll find a reason to justify their racism anyway. But I can't say for sure there's no causal connection there. I just think these language battles end up sucking up so much oxygen out of the room.
Right. And, as other people have pointed out, a lot of the media were referring to it as, Wuhan virus before Trump did. And so you could also claim that, if an Asian person gets, targeted because of this, you could blame the New York Times just as much as you could Donald Trump. But like you, I don't think that the use of language is necessarily that instrumental in the fact that people are being racist sticks to Asian people. And I would also like to know how widespread this is. If you pay hyper attention to Twitter like I do, it seems incredibly common for people to be sort of targeted because of their ethnicity right now, Asian people in particular. But I don't actually know if that's widespread or if it's, a few isolated incidents that have gotten a lot of media attention.
It's also like I don't want to say funny because it's not funny, but almost funny example of like just the sheer stupidity of racism. Because like this thing popped up in China. So you attack an Asian person who has been living in America for a long time. It's just like, it shows the fuzzy and weird and crappy way the mind can work when it's trying to carve people into groups like that.
Right. So, well, I think that means we can officially come out as an anti-racist podcast.
Yeah, in much the same way we came out. Oh no, we didn't come out as against killing old people for food. We said we're on the fence about that, but we are strictly anti-racist.
Yeah, this podcast is brought to you by Robin Gianello.
You mispronounced her name, which makes me question your commitment to anti-racism, Katie. You are a POS, a person of Semitism, and you should do better.
I will try. All right, anything else this week?
No, we should probably get in the habit of not providing our contact info 50 minutes into the recording. But we are on Twitter. We're the Bar Pod, THEBAR Pod. Please continue to rate and review us on iTunes. We've actually been very pleased and grateful at how many of you guys have been giving us those good reviews. We're off to a good start on that. Blocked and Reported Podcast at gmail.com. We are going to make even more of an effort to respond to your guys' emails. I'm Jesse Single, and remember, if you ask to masturbate in front of Louis C.K. and he says yes, make sure he really means it.
And I'm Katie Herzog. And also remember, if the DSA says you shouldn't vote for Joe Biden, you should.